Amidst all the wars and tragedies, Middle-earth has a very light-hearted side, and that is best represented by the Hobbits. Although Hobbits do have some flaws, they are meant to be incredibly charming. They delight in the simple things in life, they're generous, communal, humble, brave, and live in harmony with their surroundings instead of dominating them. That said, despite the general appeal of the Hobbit life, Tolkien was clear that it was something that would not and could not last forever. In this video, we explore the grim fate of the Hobbits. While Hobbits did not appear in any of the great tales before The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien made it clear that they had been around since the ancient days of the First Age. Despite the constant upheavals in the world, the Hobbits would survive thanks to a very important trait. They were incredibly good at existing beneath the notice of men. Obviously, their short stature played a part, but the bigger reason is that the Hobbits lived a simple lifestyle that saw them blend into the environment. During these years, they were described as savage, in the sense that they were primitive, they built no towns, and kept no records. But eventually, in the middle of the Third Age, the Hobbits made it to the Shire. They started building towns, villages, roads, they practiced widespread agriculture, they took their writing from the Dunedain and adapted many of Arnor's laws. As time went on, they would end up with sheriffs to enforce internal laws, bounders to watch the borders, they would end up with a postal service. The Shire would have a mayor in Mickle-Delving and an honorary military leader in the Thane. By the end of the Third Age, you could make an argument that the Shire was one of the most advanced societies in Middle-earth. This didn't come without a price, though. The Hobbits experienced plenty of hardship. The Great Plague killed many of them merely 30 years after the Shire was first settled. The Shire was overrun during Angmar's final victory over Arnor, and allegedly even sent troops to fight the Witch King on 2 occasions. The Shire was invaded by orcs in 2747, but the Hobbits achieved victory at the Battle of Greenfields. The Long Winter in 2758 saw a famine and mass starvation across the Shire. This happened again to a lesser extent during the Fell Winter in 2911, where packs of wolves invaded the Shire. And finally, we have the infamous scouring of the Shire during the War of the Ring. Despite the bravery and perseverance of the Hobbits, the harsh truth is that they only survived many of these events thanks to others. They were originally protected by Arnor, but even after Arnor fell, they were protected by the Dunedain Rangers. Thanks to them, the Hobbits were mostly insulated from outside threats. The Battle of Greenfields was a rare exception where something got through, and during the winter famines, many of the Hobbits owed their survival to the support of the Rangers and Gandalf. The scouring of the Shire occurred while the Rangers were away or otherwise occupied, and proved just how easy it was for several hundred ruffians to conquer the entire land. It's for this reason that when Aragorn became King Elessar of the reunited kingdom, he instituted some special protections for the Shire. In 6 of the Fourth Age, he made the Shire a free land inside the reunited kingdom, basically a protected, seemingly autonomous enclave. With this decree, he also banned men from entering the Shire, even extending that ban to himself. Funnily enough, when he travelled to the Shire to meet his friends, they would meet at the bridge over the Brandywine River. 7 years later, he added the Thane, the Mayor of the Shire, and the Master of Buckland to his Northern Council, and finally, in 31 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn extended the Shire's territory westwards to Emyn Beraed, the Tower Hills, and this land was named the Westmarch. This was a pretty good deal, and it's difficult to disagree that the Hobbits didn't deserve it. The deeds of Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin would have become widely known. They were the personal friends of both the Kings of Rohan and the reunited kingdom, and the latter 2 of them would make regular trips to those lands, and would eventually even be placed beside Elessar after he finally died. It's pretty likely that Eldarion and Elfwine, the sons of Elessar and Eomer, also would have grown up with a massive respect for the Hobbits, and you can imagine these stories were passed down to the next few generations. But eventually, things change, and not necessarily for the better. Eventually, the Shire stopped existing. In the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien tells us that Hobbits still exist. They live in the northwest of the Old World, so Europe. But they're just becoming increasingly difficult to find, not helped by the fact that they were always good at disappearing. In case you didn't know, Tolkien viewed Middle-earth as a mythological prehistory of our own world, so everything from Middle-earth was meant to exist at some point in our world. We always had explanations about what happened to the other creatures from Middle-earth. Elves either sailed into the west or faded away into spirits. The dwarves' low birth rate eventually got the better of them and they dwindled and died out. Ents would have just become trees. Without a Dark Lord, orcs and other evil creatures also would have dwindled and eventually died out. Dragons clearly existed for quite a long time, given how much they appeared in folklore and iconography in different cultures across the world. But they too were hunted to extinction. As for hobbits, we just got a vague explanation of they're still around, we just don't see them. And then Nature of Middle-earth came out, a collection of many of Tolkien's writings that had never been released. In regards to the hobbits, Tolkien did not pull any punches in discussing their sad fate. The much later dwindling of hobbits must be due to a change in their state and way of life. They became a fugitive and secret people, driven as men, the big folk, became more and more numerous, usurping the more fertile and habitable lands, to refuge in forest or wilderness, a wandering and poor folk, forgetful of their arts and living a precarious life, absorbed in the search for food and fearful of being seen, for cruel men would shoot them for sport as if they were animals. In fact, they relapsed into the state of pygmies. So basically, while the future looked bright for the hobbits in the Fourth Age, that future eventually dimmed as the world around them changed. For many years, Elessar's laws probably did protect them, as the hobbits would have been well regarded, and of course, there were plenty of empty, fertile lands to occupy in Eriador, so there was no reason to encroach on the Shire. But eventually, this changed. Maybe the kings of the reunited kingdom no longer cared for the hobbits, or perhaps the reunited kingdom fell entirely. Either way, the laws no longer existed, or were just disregarded, and men began to encroach on the Shire. The hobbits, who always relied on the protection of others, would not have been able to fight back. So they would have eventually abandoned their lands and become much more similar to their savage past, wholly preoccupied with survival rather than true civilization. This would not have helped, as Tolkien said. Cruel men would have hunted them for sport. This isn't far-fetched. This happened to the Druidine, who were driven from their lands by the pre-Numenorians, and according to Gunbarry Garn, were even sometimes hunted by the Rohirrim. And in the end, the hobbits became so fearful of men that they just avoided them at all times, and have hardly been seen since. It begs the question, do they still exist, or was Tolkien just coping? Honestly, it might be one of the darkest things Tolkien has ever written, because it's not comically evil, it's not far-fetched, it's just what people do. As the great tales were forgotten and the world changed, the hobbits were no longer seen as heroes and friendly neighbours. They were seen as targets. The world that valued them changed into a might-makes-right world, and the hobbits had no might. Their quaint civilization dismantled because eventually their neighbours decided that they needed more land. And then, after men forced them into becoming savages, they hunted them down for that savagery, regarding them as the same as animals. So next time you watch the scene from the films where Aragorn tells the hobbits that you bow to no one, well, remember that thousands of years later, things ended up sucking a bit. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I'm sorry if I ruined the Shire scenes from the Lord of the Rings for you. I hope you don't start crying next time you watch them, because all you can think about is how the Shire eventually gets messed up. Cheers, farewell, and remember, if you want more land and your neighbour is short enough, it's actually perfectly fine to steal their house. Please don't reference this video in court.